welcome to Function Loops Tutorials. This is part 1 of our mini-series. Today we'll be looking at mixing the kick drum with the bass line. I'll start by showing you the track and then I'll show you how I mixed it. All the sounds you just heard are from Function Loops. The synth that I'm using is Spire, and I'm using the Function Loops Tropicana preset pack. So the kick I'm using is from their sample pack, Tropical House Percussion, and it's number 8. What I do first for every kick drum is tune it to the key of the track. So I'll load up my sample and then I'll load a tuner on the output. Then basically I'll go higher on my keyboard until I get a note and then I'll tune it accordingly. Using the dials here, the transpose dials, and then I know this is playing at C sharp, which sounds like this. I'll just turn everything off the channel strip. So as you can hear, it's tightened the kick up a lot, moved quite a bit of the sub, and added a bit of attack to it as well. So I'll show you what I've got bit by bit. So I'll play it with everything on, and then bypassed. So what I do first is I always put the Brits channel on, and this is for gain staging. So all this is doing is basically making sure that the kick isn't coming out too hot, basically. So it's just hitting before 0. So I know that every single plugin after it won't distort, so it's not driven too heavy into the next plugin. So the next plugin I've got is the Transmod by Sonics. So if I show you, so if I turn this up, obviously you can hear it's distorting. So that's what I mean by gain staging. I noticed with the Transmod, it also, when you add more attack to it, it takes away from the low end. So I always add that back. So what I've done first is basically cut off the low end. You don't need that. You won't hear anything sort of below 20 anyway. And then I've cut some of the highs out. As you can hear, it's not very nice. Don't need that. It's quite snappy as it is. And then what I've done is I've boosted at C sharp. So with this, you just basically can move the dial. So that's C sharp. So I can move it across. So I can go to D or E. But so I've boosted at C sharp. So it's basically keeping the same key as the track. So boosting there. So if you boost it at say G, it can sort of go out of tune a little bit. So that's another tip. And then what I've got on there after is I've got the BX control, and then basically making it mono at about 200. So everything below 200 should be mono. Otherwise you can get issues with speakers. So the last plugin on the channel strip is the SSL bus compressor. I'll show you the plugin without. So bypassed, and then I'll activate it. So as you can hear, it's making the sample a lot more sharp, more snap, and also taming the sub. So what I've done on here is I've set the attack to 3, which is quite a slow attack. So it's letting the initial sample come through, so the original snap of the kick is not being affected. And then it's basically taming the sub, so it's making it sound more snappy. There's a quick release on there, so it's ready to go for the next sample. So I'll just show you that. Also, it's only subtly sort of taming it. So if I move the threshold, it's sort of, you lose sort of the snap. So I liked it exactly where it was. What I forgot to say earlier was once you actually find the sample that you like, the WAV file, when you drag and drop it into the plugin, what you should do is you should zoom right into the very beginning of the sample of the WAV file, and there might be a gap. As you can see, this one has a gap. So when you zoom right in, right to the beginning, there's actually a gap. So actually what I've done is I've moved the sample starts where it starts, just to the exactly where I reckon the sample begins basically, and it actually makes the sample punch through the mix much more, gives it a lot more attack. So as I'm happy with the kick drum, what I'll do is I'll bounce it down, or I'll just duplicate the track, which I've done here. It's exactly the same presets as the other one, but what I've changed is I've done a few changes where I've just added more snap to the kick.
So as you can hear, it's a lot more snappy. I've turned the ratio up on that, and then on with the Pro Q, I've just got rid of all the low end. So now it gives me control over the snap of the kick, as well as the mid-range and the low end. So if I play them, if I just mute it and then if I just add it in slowly, you can hear it come in. As you can hear, it punches through the mix a lot more, so I have more control over it, so I can either add sort of more low, mid-range, or I can add snap. It has to mix the kick and the bass together, so I'll just play them together.
The bass line's just basically copied across, and there's the notes there.
What I'll do is I'll show you the bass line without anything on it. Well, first of all, I'll show you what the plugin is. So I've used Spire, I've used the Tropicana pack, and I've used the preset Papaya. I'll start off with the wow on it. And what I've done with the wow is it basically adds a bit of distortion to it. And although it takes a bit low end away, I'll put that back later, but I'll just bypass that. It's only subtle, but I quite like it. I did have it a bit more extreme. I'll show you what I had it before. But it wasn't in the mix properly because there's too much going on. Got the Bryson channel strip on there after. It's quite important to get all your levels right before getting into the to the next plugin. So this is basically bringing the volume down, because if you drive it too hot, you can have digital distortion in the plugins, which obviously you don't want, and sometimes you don't know if there's no meters on them. Also, I know for a fact that the UAD Teletronics has to be basically likes the volume at a certain level when it comes into it. If it's too hot or too cold, it doesn't operate in the way it should do, as the classic model did. So it won't compress properly, and you won't have the same sort of attack and release that this has got preset built into it basically. And also with the Teletronic Grey with bass, it actually adds a bit of dimension to the sound. It gives a bit more stereo width, and it tames all the peaks, and it works as it's meant to. Next plugin is the Maserati B72 from Waves. And what I've done is put all the bass back in again. As you see, it's not running too hot, and taken quite a bit of the treble away. That's all with the treble. So I'm pretty happy with how it sounded. And then probably the most important plugin on this, I have to say, is the sidechain compressor. So basically, this adds a bit of groove to it as well. Sometimes I'll just play a melody without a kick drum playing, and have this on, just adds a bit more of a groove to it. What this does will push all the frequencies away from the kick, so the kick will punch through the mix much cleaner. So if I quickly show you it without it and with the kick and without the kick. As you can hear, it makes the kick drum punch through the mix better. So it's quite important to have that on there. Without all the plugins after, it's quite extreme setting, but what I've done is I've added a compressor just to tame it all. So I've got the API on there as well. Just adding a little bit of low end, tiny little bit of high, mid range, tiny little bit of highs, around about 500 as well, just to make it punch through the mix a bit cleaner. And then I've got the UAD Teletronic, the UAD Fatso on this. And what this does is it takes all the dynamic range away. I don't want any dynamic range with bass, and it adds a little bit of saturation to it. And also it takes away a little bit of the sidechain as well, so the volume's a bit more flat rather than bouncing around as much, which I quite like. I've just got the control on there, BX control, just mono in below 400. Like I said before, you don't need any sub in stereo, you want it all mono. And then what I've got on there, I've got the Pro Q2, and what the Pro Q2 is doing is just rounding it all off, getting rid of stuff I didn't want. And then basically these are problem frequencies, I'll just show you those. It's quite quiet, but you can hear them sort of whistling away in the background. Also, 200 is not a very good frequency to have in the mix. You just get rid of that because it's just mud. To do that, what I did was I just made a narrow Q and just slowly went through until I found bits I didn't like, basically, and then just dialed it back. And then I've got the UAD2 precision limiter, just taming it all basically. not doing a lot, it's adding a bit of volume. It's quite important, this part. So what I tend to do next is, once I'm happy with the kick and the bass, what I'll do is I'll play them together, and then I'll find a sweet spot in my room where all the sub is basically, and what I do is I get rid of all the highs on the EQ, to bring it back. So what I do is I bring it back, and then go and listen in my sweet spot and see if basically if the bass is too heavy or the kick's too heavy. So what I've done with the Pro Q2 is I've taken away whereabouts the kick is hitting here. So without that, I'll show you that. So if I move it's getting in the way of the kick, it's muddying it up a little bit. So this is how I can tell if I've got too much bass or I need to add more bass. So what I'll do is add more bass into it. And as you can hear now, the kick drum is not as punchy. So this is quite important, just to hear where the kick drum is hitting and where the bass is sitting, basically. You can tell, and how much sidechain to add onto it or take away.